Did you know that 8 men awarded Britain's highest medal for valour, the Victoria Cross, were later stripped of it? But what had they done to receive such a punishment? It's time to explore a little told and shocking chapter in British military history. It was the morning of Saturday, the 23rd of April 1921. Hundreds of people gathered to watch the funeral cortege make its way to Witton Cemetery in Birmingham, England. The simple coffin on a gun carriage was draped in the Union flag, and as the coffin was lowered into the grave, 3 volleys were fired and the last post sounded. It was a fitting send-off for a man awarded Britain's highest military medal for valour, the Victoria Cross. George Ravenhill was awarded the VC during the Boer War, when, under intense fire, he'd helped save the guns at the Battle of Colenso. And yet this VC hero has a darker and sadder story. Since its inception in 1856, there have been 1,358 Victoria Crosses awarded. But 8 of those heroes were forced to forfeit their medals, and George Ravenhill was the last of those men. But why did he and the others have to forfeit Britain's highest medal for valour? This is his and their stories. The Victoria Cross was inaugurated by Queen Victoria in 1856, just after the Crimean War ended. Unlike its predecessors, it was open to all ranks and was specifically for acts of supreme bravery. The original idea was to make it an order of chivalry, but then the plans were changed for it to become a medal instead. And that simple change would have huge ramifications for George Ravenhill and 7 other soldiers. Because the warrant or rules of the VC were based upon an order of chivalry, and specifically Clause 15. This stated that if a member of the order be convicted or indeed accused of treason, cowardice, felony, or any infamous crime, they would have brought the Victoria Cross into disrepute, and consequently their name should be erased from the register of holders, and their pension, which was originally £10 a year or £50 a year for someone who was not quite able to earn a living due to disability or age, should cease. And despite the Victoria Cross becoming a medal rather than an order of chivalry, the warrant wasn't changed to reflect it. So what heinous crimes did the 8 men who forfeited their Victoria Crosses commit? Let's find out. The first 85 VC recipients were announced in the London Gazette in February 1857 for retrospective actions during the recent Crimean War. One of those first 85 was Edward St John Daniel. As a 17-year-old midshipman in the Royal Navy, he had served at the siege of Sevastopol. His citation in the London Gazette highlighted 3 actions that led to his award. The first was carrying supplies of gunpowder to a gun battery whilst under fire, after that fire had killed the horses pulling the wagons. Later on, when the British tried to storm the Redan fortifications, he went to the aid of his injured captain, William Peel, son of the former British Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel. Applying a tourniquet to Peel's injured arm, he then led his officer to safety. Daniel, however, was not at the first award ceremony when Queen Victoria presented 65 medals at London's Hyde Park in June 1857. By then he was sailing with Captain Peel on board HMS Shannon, bound for China. However, they were diverted to India, where it was all hands to the pumps with the outbreak of the 1857 Indian Revolt, also called the Indian Mutiny. It was here in 1858 that Peel died from smallpox, and the death of his captain seemed to impact the behaviour of the young junior officer. In 1860, and now a lieutenant, Daniel was court-martialled for drunkenness. A year later, he was listed as a deserter in advance of another court-martial for what was described as a disgraceful offence. In a very Victorian manner, no one explained exactly what that offence was, so your guess is as good as mine. However, in September 1861, Queen Victoria signed the royal warrant that made Edward St John Daniel the first man to forfeit his Victoria Cross. Leaving the Royal Navy, he died in New Zealand in 1868, aged just 31. He remains the only officer forced to forfeit his VC. Next to forfeit was a sergeant. James McGuire was a sergeant in the 1st Bengal European Fusiliers, and during the Indian Mutiny was present at the storming of Delhi in 1857. Suddenly, several ammunition boxes close by caught fire. The 30-year-old lifted them up and threw them into a ditch, preventing a major explosion. Awarded the Victoria Cross, he left the army in 1859 and returned to his native Ireland, where he died in 1862. Shortly before his death, he was convicted of stealing a cow and was forced to forfeit his Victoria Cross. Another Indian Mutiny veteran and VC holder was Valentine Bambrick. Bambrick came from a military family. Both his father and his brother served with the 11th Hussars. In fact, his brother rode with the 11th Hussars at the charge of the Light Brigade. Valentine, however, decided to join the infantry, enlisting when he was just 16 with the 60th Rifles. Awarded the Victoria Cross during the revolt in India in 1858 when he was just 21, his citation is very brief and doesn't really shed too much light on exactly what happened, apart from the fact that he defended himself against 3 armed Indian soldiers, killing one and wounding the others. Within a year of his award, he was in military jail 3 times for insubordination. Stationed back in England at Aldershot, he was once more in front of a judge, this time for assaulting and robbing another soldier of his medals. Sentenced to 3 years hard labour, his VC was declared forfeit. Bambrick committed suicide while serving his sentence at Pentonville Prison in 1864. It was nearly a decade before there was another forfeiture. Michael Murphy was born in County Tipperary, Ireland. He joined what was called the Military Train, later the Army Service Corps and now the Royal Logistics Corps. Rather like Midshipman Daniel, he too was en route for the Far East when his ship was diverted to India in 1857. He was awarded Britain's highest medal for valour when, despite being severely wounded himself, he defended an injured comrade during the mutiny. He was presented with his VC by Queen Victoria herself at Windsor Castle and rose to the rank of Farrier Major before transferring to the 7th Hussars in 1871. A year later, 1872, he and a civilian accomplice were arrested for stealing sacks of horse fodder from the depot. Sentenced to 9 months hard labour, an order was issued for the forfeit of his Victoria Cross. However, his wife and children had suddenly disappeared from their military accommodation, along with his VC. Despite that blemish on his record, Murphy actually remained in the army for another 3 years, before leaving after 20 years' service in 1875. He moved to Northumberland in the northeast of England, becoming a blacksmith, before working in an ironworks and dying of pneumonia in 1893. 5 years later, his Victoria Cross resurfaced at an auction, being sold by an anonymous seller. It was actually purchased on behalf of the Army Service Corps and is now housed at the Royal Logistics Corps Museum in Winchester. Next to forfeit their Victoria Cross was Thomas Lane. He was awarded the VC during the storming of the Taku forts in the Second Opium War in China, while serving with the 67th Regiment of Foot, later the Hampshire Regiment. He went on to serve in South Africa, where in 1881 he was convicted of desertion and a theft of a horse and arms. The War Office requested that the authorities in South Africa return his Victoria Cross to London. However, they were unable to do so, as he had entrusted it to a friend, and he wouldn't divulge their name. Thomas Lane died in South Africa 8 years later. Shortly before the First World War, his Victoria Cross also surfaced, this time in a pawnbroker's back in Britain. It's now in possession of the Hampshire Regiment Museum, which is also based in Winchester. Malden in Essex is probably best known for its sea salt. On Spittal Road in the town sits St Peter's Hospital, with its imposing Victorian frontage. But when it was built in the 1830s, it had a darker purpose. It was the Malden Union Workhouse, capable of housing up to 450 inmates. And it was in this workhouse that another man who forfeited his VC died in 1912. Frederick Corbett, originally from London, earned the Victoria Cross during General Sir Garnet Wolseley's expedition against Urabi Pasha in Egypt in 1882. During a skirmish south of Alexandria, an officer was mortally wounded, and despite the officer being out in the open, Corbett ran over and stayed with the man whilst under fire, trying to stem the bleeding. He was recommended for the VC, which he received the following year. Shortly afterwards, he left the army, only to re-enlist with the Royal Artillery in 1884. Before the year was out, he was convicted at a court-martial of being absent without leave and embezzlement and theft from an officer. His Victoria Cross was forfeited by royal warrant and his VC pension terminated. But once more, like some of the other men I've talked about, his VC wasn't returned to the army or the government. Although, in his case, it wasn't because of a calculated evasion, but something slightly sadder. During his very brief spell in Civvy Street, he had fallen into financial hardship and had sold his Victoria Cross. Despite the adverse court-martial of being absent without leave, embezzlement and theft from an officer, he actually remained in the army until 1891. But upon returning to civilian life, he once more struggled with money. He ended his days in the Malden workhouse, where he died in 1912. Corbett was buried in an unmarked grave. It wasn't until 2004 that a headstone was finally placed on his grave in the town. James Collis was born in 1856, the year that the VC was inaugurated. In 1880, he was serving with the Royal Horse Artillery during the Second Anglo-Afghan War. During the British defeat at the Battle of Maiwand, an officer was trying to load wounded men onto the limber to escape the battlefield. Collis ran forward, drawing Afghan fire away from the limber, enabling the officer to move the injured men to safety. For this action, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. 15 years later, in 1895, he was convicted of bigamy. Sentenced to 18 months hard labour, he was also ordered to forfeit his VC. Having served his prison sentence, he settled in the Suffolk market town of Bury St Edmunds. Incredibly, when the First World War broke out, James Collis, now aged 58, re-enlisted with the Suffolk Regiment. He served as a drill sergeant until discharged on medical grounds in 1917. He died in 1918 from a heart attack and was buried with military honours at Wandsworth in London. Following his death, his sister wrote to King George V, pleading for her brother's name to be restored to the Victoria Cross Register. Whilst not initially reinstating his name on the register, the King's private secretary did agree on behalf of the King that his name should appear on the list of VC recipients on the Royal Artillery Memorial. The final man to forfeit his Victoria Cross was the man that this story started with, George Ravenhill from Birmingham. George Albert Ravenhill was born on the 23rd of February 1872 in the Thimble Mill Lane in the Nechells area of the city, son of Mary and Thomas Ravenhill, a wood turner. He enlisted with the Royal Scots Fusiliers in May 1898 and a year later found himself in South Africa, fighting in the Anglo-Boer War. It was during the disastrous Battle of Colenso, the third British defeat in what the press dubbed Black Week, that Ravenhill was recommended for the Victoria Cross. During the battle, the British guns had advanced way ahead of the infantry and had come under Boer fire without any support. Some way behind them, George Ravenhill and his comrades in the Royal Scots Fusiliers were desperately trying to keep up. Whilst the Naval Brigade managed to withdraw their 6 guns, the 12 guns of the artillery lay abandoned, with most of their crews killed. 3 officers, Captain Schofield, Congrave and Lieutenant Roberts, son of Field Marshal Lord Roberts of Kandahar, rode forward to rescue the guns. Ravenhill ran under heavy fire from his shelter position to assist them. They managed to get 2 of the guns to safety before Roberts was killed and the other 2 officers, along with Private Ravenhill, were wounded. For his actions, Ravenhill was awarded the Victoria Cross, which was presented to him by Queen Victoria's grandson, the Duke of York. George Ravenhill left the army in early 1908. By then he was married to Florence Langford and had 4 children. He found it difficult to adjust to civilian life and, like many other veterans from this period, fell on hard times. Within just a matter of months, he and his family ended up in the Aston Union Workhouse in Birmingham. Now, if you're shocked to hear that yet another Victoria Cross holder ended up in a workhouse, you're not alone. Even at the time, people were shocked too. In May 1908, Cecil Harmsworth, the MP for Droitwich, raised his plight in the House of Commons. The MP asked the Secretary of State for War What action was being taken to help this war hero? The Secretary of State responded that the case was under investigation. Well, it seems that the investigation either hadn't proceeded with much speed or come to the right conclusion when in August of that year Ravenhill appeared at Aston Police Court. The court record described him as a labourer of no fixed residence, and along with two others, he was accused of stealing iron to the value of 6 shillings from the Bromford Mill in Birmingham. It was also noted that he had already been in front of the court a few months beforehand for refusing to perform his allotted tasks in the workhouse. Ravenhill said he was struggling financially as he hadn't received a pension of £50 which he claimed he was owed. Nevertheless, he was found guilty of the theft and fined 10 shillings, nearly twice the value of the stolen goods. However, when Ravenhill said that he couldn't pay the fine, he was sent to jail for a month instead. He was the last man to forfeit his Victoria Cross, which was sold by the War Office at Sotheby's later that year for £42. Following his stint in prison, Ravenhill continued to struggle financially. In the 1911 census, he and his family were again registered as inmates in the workhouse. 2 years later, George and Florence took what must have been a heart-wrenching decision to send 3 of their children to North America to be fostered. Sometime after that, they moved to the Cotswold market town of Chipping Norton and had 2 more children. On the 11th of September 1914, just 3 weeks after the First World War broke out, he re-enlisted in the army. Isn't it strange? You aren't worthy of wearing your Victoria Cross, but you are still worthy to be killed fighting for your country. Initially he served in the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry before transferring to the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, where his campaign medal record shows him serving on the Salonika front in November of 1915. He was discharged from the army on medical grounds in 1916. Once more, he and his family returned to Aston in Birmingham, where the last of his 8 children, a daughter, was born in 1919. George Ravenhill died of a heart attack aged 49 in April 1921. He left his widow and children living in a 1-bedroomed tenement apartment. Despite the full military honours at his funeral at Witton Cemetery in Birmingham on the 23rd of April 1921, he was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. His name is engraved on the screen wall at the cemetery, and he lies in a grave simply numbered 36. It was a sad and even shocking end to a man awarded Britain's highest medal for valour. The idea that a man deemed brave enough to receive the VC should then have it taken away certainly angered the man who, as Duke of York, had presented Ravenhill with his medal in 1901. He was now King George V. In the wake of James Collis's sister writing to him the year before Ravenhill's death, the King expressed his sentiments very strongly to his private secretary in July 1920. No matter the crime committed by anyone on whom the VC has been conferred, the decoration should not be forfeited. The King went on, were a VC to be sentenced to be hanged for murder, he should be allowed to wear the VC on the scaffold. Powerful words, and I suspect you agree with me. Absolutely right. Since then, no one has ever had to forfeit their Victoria Cross. George Ravenhill and the other 7 men were readmitted to the register of Victoria Cross holders. And while some VC recipients since then have indeed fallen on hard times or been accused of crimes, they have never been stripped of the medal that they earned for valour in the service of their country. If the stories of the men awarded the Victoria Cross fascinate you, then please check out my other story about New Zealander Charles Upham, one of only 3 men to have ever been awarded the Victoria Cross twice. Oh, and if you'd like to support my show, then please do click on the links in the description. It's thanks to the support of people like Shupanka, QA Library, Carolyn, Charles and Chris that I'm able to devote so much time to both researching and then producing these episodes. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.